don't think I'm exaggerating here, in 2 hours that for similar quality would have taken me 30 hours, 40 hours in some cases 2 years ago. A year ago, the work of content marketing, the person that I work with on our team doing content marketing, we were talking about this the other day, I think, quite frankly, the job has changed from I need good copywriters to I need somebody that is a good instrumenter.
Yeah, welcome to another episode of the All Innovation Podcast. I got my trusty co-host here, Keenan Hart, and an amazing guest, Jake Goldman. Jake, I was talking to Keenan before you jumped online. I was like, I feel like you're the guy behind the internet with all the websites that you've built. And I'd love for you to just do maybe a quick little introduction to catch up our audience, and then we can kind of take it off from there.
I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like it's only downhill from God of the internet. I'll try to follow that. Yeah. So maybe more of a demigod. I've been working with web since I think there was a web to develop with, probably since like the mid 90s, tinkering and before I even went to college and school, even doing some consulting projects back when I could get out of retail in high school. And then studied information systems, studied technology while the web was really coming to life in the early 2000s. Was a big believer, even though I always knew I wanted to start a business, going to work for other people, learning the ropes on somebody else's dime, having some good mentors. So went into digital production in days that were all about Flash and interactive animated ads and a whole different era of the internet. Circa 2006, 2007, which feels, I guess it is a long time ago. Joined as a second hire, a very tiny agency that was growing about the time about like content management systems, and it was a little less everybody doing their own thing, starting to see some concentricity, some energy around like open source platforms, really mature platforms to do website creation, to do content management, got into open source. Saw that a couple of platforms like WordPress, I thought were growing quickly, were really making content management more accessible, were bringing down some of the costs of like licensing and just and doing great, having great web experiences and great publishing experiences. And so 3 years on from that journey, decided it was time to start my own business. Thought this WordPress thing in particular as a starting point for the business was going to be sort of a rocket ship to hitch our wagon to and differentiate. And then from 2011 to 2023, built that company up, bootstrapped it from me sitting in a corner, being very fortunate to get introduced to clients like TechCrunch and others, writing code, doing sales, doing marketing, starting to build a team up to mid 2023. We're about 300-ish people, give or take, doing about $40 to $45 million a year in revenue, and decided this is now turning into a very different job as the owner, and not necessarily the job that I got into this for, and chose to recognize some of, I think, my own limitations in thinking about the future. And so did a financed merger with an incredibly impressive app development product design shop called Fueled. And the latest stage of my journey is now being delighted to be in a role that is not the sort of the guy running the shop, focusing on some new entrepreneurial outlets within the business, focusing more on content marketing and storytelling, delightfully not having 3 people reporting up through me as a manager. And here we are in this bold new era of AI and new platforms and new technology. And I don't know, does that bring us up to present?
I think we're pretty close, man. I really want to talk a little bit about those early days, right? When you talk about you go and work for somebody else, you were paid at that point in time to earn and to learn, which was absolutely phenomenal. And you took an amazing route towards, entrepreneurship and starting your own show. When you're sitting in the corner and you're fortunate enough to have customers like TechCrunch introduced to you, what are some of the thoughts that go through your head, right? Being a small shop, being like, okay, this is a huge brand that I need to live up to. Was there any internal pressure, or like what was your natural reaction in that moment to kind of be able to slay those giant dragons?
I mean, the short answer would be I'm competitive. I was maybe more competitive before, when I was younger and had kids, even more competitive than I am now. I was excited to build a business, excited to really prove that the platform we had hitched our wagon to could do big things, could have kind of big impact and grow up. So I think the short, unnuanced answer is I was delighted. I think I was very fortunate in the sense that, how to say it without reinforcing this God myth. I was very fortunate in the sense that I knew how to do the work. So I was not an entrepreneur that came in, I just have an idea.
for business, but I'm reliant on quickly finding others to do it. I knew that as a backstop, even when I brought in help, I could literally write the code that they needed to do. If I needed to put marketing on hold, if things were going a little shaky. So I think having the confidence that I wasn't just entirely dependent on others, that I could really bootstrap, maybe gave me a bit more confidence in an entrepreneur, maybe more dependent on a very early, very nascent team to be able to jump in. But I was nothing but enthused, hungry to chase after them. I'm very motivated, more so than like by money or by cash. I'm very motivated by having impact. There's a lot of ways that manifests when I look back at my career. So the idea of being able to like tell a story, if you want to look at it as pride, be able to tell a story about working with that kind of customer was nothing but motivating to me. If there was any other side to it, I will say, like, having been in management roles for about 5 years before starting 10up and starting the business, I did take some pleasure from feeling like maybe I'll take a year off from like payroll and worrying about employees. And as I was so fortunate to have clients and opportunities rolling in very quickly, that quickly went by the wayside. And within the first year, we had, I think, like 7 or 8 full-time employees. So if there was any small nuance and nothing but dying to get to work, it was accepting, okay, this is not really going to be a recharge period from personnel management, which I think I can do well for the right people, which I can enjoy and find fulfilling. But I will not say I'm a leader who got into the business because I particularly enjoy the people management side of the operation.
Dante, I'm always wondering how people like Jake here, like hitch their wagon to the platform that's going to become like the standard, right? We had the CEO of MindGrub Technologies on here, and he was talking about his aha moment was he was walking home one day in the rain, and he got an email or a push notification that the iOS App Store SDK had just dropped. Do you remember that? And he was like, this is it. This is the future. So Jake, I got to ask the question for both of us, man. How did you know that, that was going to be the platform that you were going to hook your wagon to and then ride that thing into the sunset?
Yeah, I mean, you never really know for sure. And nor do you have to, if you're not trying to do, we're not talking, unicorn startup that it's, go $1 billion or go home, worst case scenarios ends up being sort of small and boutique. I don't think there was any question, even when I started the company in 2011, that it had some market, some audience. The question in terms of building a larger company, making a bet on quick growth, was whether it would be a rocket ship. I think, so perhaps another animating point of view I have in general is I'm very much like a devil's in the details kind of person. I'm a real believer in like, it's the things happening in the weeds and on the ground, not the big macro, we call it ivory tower, if you will, kind of view that is the thing that's most informative, most useful. I feel like that comes a bit from my engineering background. I kid that like in engineering, you realize that things go wrong, not because you had a poor, grandly thought out scheme, but you could probably forgot a semicolon somewhere. So it gives you a real perspective on it's the details that tend to matter the most. I say that to say like I was doing it and in it. Like at that previous company before we wrapped up, I think we had Scale. That was their first full-time, the owner's first full-time hire. We're at 15 or 16 people after 3 years when I left. So this was not like I'm in some management ivory tower role. Like I was writing code, participating in building applications, building websites. And so when we picked different platforms, we kind of divided and conquered in the team, myself and that owner sort of went down the Drupal path. I said, I think this WordPress thing is interesting. I'm very UI centered. I think it's smarter in terms of UI and where it's going. It's a little bit more focused in knowing what it's good at. There are things that I find really compelling about this. So firsthand working on the platform, getting to be connected with like early days at Automatic, which was the WordPress founders company, and seeing what they were doing with like what they called their VIP program, which was more enterprise customers, getting pulled into that world and seeing some early adopters and what they were using, literally just making sites. I haven't been a builder for the last many years with it, and seeing how, at that time, it sounds silly today, how much faster I could build a good experience, and not just a good front end experience, but that wasn't dramatically different, but how much better it was for the people that were using the product. And then on top of that, going in like networking, these WordCamps, these grassroots sort of WordPress events were springing up everywhere. And I was connecting with these hungry, smart people that were seeing the same thing that I was all over the country, but wasn't really enough momentum that they had started to build like a real mature workforce around it. So to me, all the signals were there of like, there's a rich, young, next generation developer community that's excited about it. These customers are going to grow up and become bigger customers, and even some early, mostly in publishing, but some early enterprise sort of big companies were getting excited about it. I saw them happy. I saw how much faster than like writing a completely custom PHP CMS from scratch or, would look like. So all like the gut indicators were there that this is going to be something more. I also think if you look at the history with like open source and these technologies and sort of how technology integrators as service agencies spring up, one thing you see is that there is this repeated pattern of, for lack of a better phrase, agencies of record springing up. So the examples I point to might be a little bit inside baseball for some people, but like maybe the more popular example would be like Red Hat and Linux right early on. So, Linus Torvalds create Linux, Red Hat sort of decides we're going to become, they're known for an OS variant, but they were a services business predominantly for enterprises. They hitched their wagon to, we're going to be the best at Linux instrumentation. A better example that's closer to home, before Acquia came in and kind of just decided they're going to eat everybody's lunch, like Lullabot in the Drupal space was a good example at that time in 2007, 2008, 2009 of they saw what was happening with Drupal, they saw it, and they got right in front of, we're going to focus on this and we're going to be known as the company you come to for services. So I saw that model play out a few times, combined with everything I said before about like sort of the workforce, the quality of the product. And I just, I thought, I can make happy customers. And I think people are going to catch on quick that this is a good platform to work with.
I'd love to kind of double click on this idea of being successful through time and growing through time. You talk about, growing really quickly in your first year, going from very small, yourself to 7 to 8 employees, rather quickly. What were some of the earlier challenges? Keenan and I always talk about, the inflection points in business, right? And there's so many bosses that you have to beat at each of those inflection points. I'm curious, what were some of the bosses, in those early stages that you feel like you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think I like the metaphor of bosses. It's, it's funny, the going to 7 to 8, maybe because, I didn't spring out of college, starting my first, starting a company as my first gig. I'd been in management roles. I'd had sometimes over a dozen people reporting to me. I can definitely tell you some stories about hard lessons learned about 7 to 8, but that was not the hard inflection point for me. I feel like that 7 to 8 is also like, sounds a bit maybe minimizing to say it this way, but it's still the size where you can kind of wing it, right? And stretch yourself in the organization. Like the bigger challenges for me when you started going like to 20 to 30, that's 70 to 100, 100 to 200. Those are, I think, some of the harder bottlenecks where you really, you're at the limits of I can just keep extending myself and the core talent. 7 to 8, I think the hardest lessons I had to learn very early. It's, hindsight, I still feel a pang of, an old wound or something. We're growing myself up in terms of being not just a manager, but a leader that the team needed. I think when you're in that early overextending yourself kind of phase and you have to spend your day bouncing between I don't want to call it the HR, the people and the culture, right, of the business, the literally doing sales and putting together proposals and SOWs, literally being one of the people helping write code and teach people how to build things the right way, doing the networking to generate that doing, literally trying to work on your company website, right? You tell us when you're doing all of those things, I think you end up having to give some things short shrift. Something's got to give in that process. I think I too easily gave on what it means to build a first generation of talent that had staying power, that had real enduring cultural affinity for business. And though I'm quite proud that actually there's 2 or 3 people out of those first 10 that to this day are still around at the company 14 years later, there was definitely in that first year, 2 years, there was definitely some incredible talent I had the pleasure of working with that, I think if they were very earnest about it, they would say you are a hard person to work for. And you skip a lot of our one-on-ones, and you seem like you don't really have the time for me unless you need something from me. And it doesn't make me feel good about working here. It's not quite how they put it to me. Some were very kind and gentle and genuinely probably just wanted some bigger opportunities. Some were maybe more direct about how they felt about me. But I would definitely say that the first hard school of Fort Knox for me was, you can't give, if you want to build something, you can't give. The thing you can't choose to give short shrift to is actually building enduring relationships with that first generation of talent.
I mean, I've heard the analogy before. It's, you as the founder, let's say that you're a level 100, right? Just to kind of go back to the gaming analogy, right? The person you hire underneath you is probably going to be a 95, right? If you're lucky. And the person they hire is probably going to be like an 86. And the person beneath them is probably going to be like a 79. And it just continues to dilute down from the standard that you establish. So, Jake, did you have a tough time in those early days, just kind of now that we can reflect on the past, of kind of helping people live up to your standard, right? Because in the early days, you said that you had the confidence that you could be the guy who wrote the code and did everything else and picked up the loose pieces. But when we get to that scalable size, we have to start trusting other people to execute on the vision that we outlay. And often they're not going to be a level 100 like we are. So how'd you navigate that?
You just keep building me up here. Blaming my ego. Let's go with maybe a 97 for me.
Okay.
I mean, it was certainly, there's truth in what you're saying, and it was certainly different at different inflection points. And I think it's worth talking about what those inflection points are. I think for a bunch of different reasons we can get into. I think for me, when we started getting to like 30 to 40 people, certainly when we became over 100 people, the challenge of how you don't, sort of degrade a little bit, for lack of a better word, at every step of the sort of now hierarchical chain of the business is a tricky one that I think has as much to do when you reach that scale of like the kind of person that chooses to work for a company of that scale, the kind of person that maybe chooses to join, at least in my experience, a scrappy 4, 10, 20 person startup probably already has sort of an inclination toward, I want a small, tight team. I like working with a bunch of, I don't know what the rating of the show is, a bunch
savages.
That's
what I'm talking about.
Let's go with that. A bunch of savages. I know that I'm going to have to take real ownership. I want to be part of a tight ownership team. I think when you start talking about over 100 people, over 200 people, the calculus is different. It's I want someplace stable, right? I want someplace where I don't have to worry about making all the decisions, or I don't have to think about the business side. I can just cozy up in my cubby and write code, or spit out design. So I think that challenge of how do you continue to scale the holistic service expectation is there. I think to some degree of, like, again, who chooses to join early firms, some degree of perhaps luck, some degree of, I will say generally, I think I have a pretty good batting average with talent scouting, and the fact that there was a bunch of people out there in an early remote company that I had networked with that were very passionate about WordPress as a platform at that time and didn't have, sounds kind of sad, but didn't have many choices in terms of places that were betting on full-time hires and getting to do it full-time. I think I was very fortunate that actually that first generation of talent, that first 10, 20, 30 people, not that there weren't some misses in there, but as a batting average, I actually think we're pretty darn strong. In fact, some of the people, unfortunately, some of the people that probably got sick of me quickly were more capable than I am, have gone on to do bigger and better things than I have done. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I guess in my case, I actually did not find that like the early hires in the company were a challenge in terms of living up to everything that we could be. Again, not 100% batting average, doesn't mean there wasn't some training, but the bigger challenges in not letting a mediocrity start to take hold came more in the later scaling phases of the company when a different sort of persona was looking to join a different kind of business.
Makes sense.
What were some of those most challenging moments? So, maybe continuing a bit laboriously on the gaming analogy, like what was your Bowser moment where you're like, hey, I don't know if I can defeat this boss? And then like, how did you overcome it?
Great question. Trying to narrow it down to one. I think one of the hardest transformations we went through, and I'm it starts to blur together like the scale and the years, was so there was a period that I want to say was hard to believe over a decade ago. I want to say it was circa 2014, 3 years into the business, 3.5 years into the business, when actually we brought in called him a CEO, a friend of mine named John Eckman, really a partner in practice in leading the business with me. That coincided with a period where I think we were starting to cross some thresholds of having to figure out how to scale up some functions, hence hiring a partner and CEO in the business, figuring out how we scale up ops in a different way, not just the delivery and sales, but some of that back office stuff, which, the economics start to make sense to have people dedicated to that. Having to scale that up, having to create a little bit more structure as you sort of burst up to 40, 50 people in the company. And I think it was a period where I think for the first time, we started to see more churn in the business of personnel, people that were, I think, some in cases struggling to go through that transformation of the business from tiny startup to we're growing fast, we're going quickly, things seem a little bit wobbly at times in the company. I also think for some key leaders, seeing me hire from the outside as CEO was, in hindsight, I still think it was the right choice. I could have handled it better. Was demoralizing for some of those leaders. I think they saw it not by my intention, but I understand in hindsight that they saw it as almost like a demotion of my lieutenants within the company. And that was a period of, I think, great like change in the business, how we're structured, who the leaders are, who the biggest decision makers are in the company. But as a consequence, with a lot of good change also came a lot of churn. So I think there were some dark days during that time when key people that you really count on to run parts of your business really questioning their place and their identity. That kind of thing and that kind of like culture can start to tumbleweed, where you start to see that questioning spread throughout more of the business. But I guess if I was to pick one, certainly, maybe that's my Bowser.
You mentioned fully remote earlier. Are you guys remote at this point in time? Are you guys in office, or what is the structure?
We were. I guess I wouldn't say. Can you call it remote from day one? It was just me, I guess, in office. Effectively remote from day one. I saw talent going to these events all around the company. There were good early leaders in the space. Again, in the WordPress space in particular, Automatic was seen as an early pioneer and role model. Working in the open source space, you also see how people working on these projects that are online as repos can collaborate effectively from all around the world. I was personally in a place in my life where I looked around and know that I wanted to hitch my wagon to being stuck in geography, for the next 3 or 4 years. So all of these factors, having good role models, having access to seeing all this talent available all around the country, to be able to bring in, that was excited about this platform, my own sense of unsettledness in my life, all pointed to I think I can make this remote thing work.
Do you ever travel the world like our guy, Mr. Dante McClain here, and live in a couple different countries and just make a living from your laptop? Or what was your dream?
I think I am, this might sound like an odd thing for a rapid growth entrepreneur to say, but I'm in very many ways, especially my personal side, to balance out the professional side, I am very much a person of routine and habit to be most productive. It's fun. So I don't mind, I had that burst of productivity working out of a hotel for a few days and the different surroundings, but I can't do that continuously. I function best, I'm the guy that gets up in the morning and does the same thing for the first 45 to 60 minutes every day. And that's what gets me in the right headspace to be at my best performance. It was nice to be able to do more business travel and conference travel and have that freedom without it being as disruptive to the team around me. But never did the digital nomad thing. Dante, I admire you, and you are a foreign creature to me that to even think to be productive while figuring out where I'm sleeping next week.
Yeah. It's definitely a give and take for sure. It's fun, but it can be very distracting for sure. So definitely a phase in my life, but next to impossible to do now, especially with 2 kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'd love to switch gears a little bit. I know in our previous conversation, we talked about, so many different exciting things, and being in the development space, I call them extinction events, right? Where everything feels like it's kind of flipped on its head and you're kind of scrambling and trying to figure out the new way. One of the new, things that everyone's talking about obviously is AI. What are some of the things within AI and Gen AI that really excites you and potential use cases, especially when it comes to the development side?
AI, never heard of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where to start. There are so many ways that it's completely, I think, rapidly transforming. And I feel like every time I have this conversation, particularly because, I'm sure you all feel it doing a regular podcast, it can start to feel cliche. Talking what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about AI. So I feel compelled when I sort of start these conversations with a different audience. If you ask people that know me well, I am the last person on the hype trains. I still don't really think crypto is going to change the world. Was never on the blockchain wagon. Not to say it doesn't have a use, not to say there's not something interesting there. But I'm usually a skeptic going in. Like I've seen enough roller coasters of a hot new thing that then fades away. And yet I will tell you, like, if you see me like completely energized and completely all bouncing off the walls here about AI, like the fact that I think even someone like me truly believes that this is completely transformational. This will be looked at like, the horse to the automobile in 20, 30 years in terms of just completely transforming what industry is, what the landscape is. I'm there. I'm fully am drinking the Kool-Aid on generative AI and all these technologies that are springing up. There's a bunch of different directions we could take it. I personally am spending most of my time now thinking about how it completely transforms and changes content marketing, just where I'm personally focusing my time and energy, which I think is the most mature use case of the technology today. There's obviously other applications. I think we are moving quickly as a business to figure out what it means for technology and engineering, lest we become overpriced dinosaurs for the value in months. But I am not as close to sort of governing sort of engineering strategy and innovation. But I can tell you, like, having turned my attention to specifically like putting out white papers, content marketing, blog posts, I am now I've been focused on this for the last month, trying to get things sort of heated back up. After sort of stalling a little bit with our merger integration. And I can tell you, like, I can do work and I don't think I'm exaggerating here, in 2 hours that for similar quality would have taken me 30 hours, 40 hours in some cases 2 years ago, a year ago in the business. The work of content marketing, the person that I work with on our team doing content marketing, we talked about this the other day, I think, quite frankly, the job has changed from I need good copywriters to I need somebody that is a good instrumenter. And I'm good.
So you mean like prompt engineering? You mean instrumenter as in like they can efficiently use these tools?
Yeah, effectively. Like, her name's Annie, the person I work with most day to day on just producing content. Her job when we hired her was I need somebody to take these pitches, take these ideas and draft up a version of the story. This is not a knock on Annie. Like, I can get a better V1 in 20 minutes of my time, putting in some bullets, putting in a transcript from a conversation, having trained it a little bit on this is my voice and these are my hiccups and how I like to write. And here's content that looks like our content. Then she would write, having spent, some of that is like expertise, in the industry, there's a lot of different, some of that is just a commentary on how powerful the technology is. So like her job at this point, from my point of view, her job is wildly different than it was a year ago. She is no longer a copywriter that does some production. Her job is going to push out 5 times what you're doing before. Her job is to figure out how to use those tools. And there are still things I wouldn't get into it. Like, I don't think Gen AI is there yet for. And so if you're 5xing the amount of content you're producing, you do still have a bunch of work to do on just some of the mechanics around publishing and producing content. So things like I know there are some innovative tools we play with, but I don't really think it's there if you want to be consistently on brand with things like turning things into like a booklet, right, from your content. The image stuff for very abstract things is pretty good and usable. If you're trying to articulate specific ideas visually, or even like conceptual and illustrated mock-ups of like it's not, in my experience, it's not there. And then there's just things like maybe like the instrumenter kind of tools will get there. I'm sure they will. But right now, I'm not counting on like operators to make sure things are published at the right time and go out on social at the right time and look the right way. So her job is now knowing how to use these tools to quickly generate content, is now at a much faster velocity how to instrument and how to produce much more quickly.
And what part of your responsibility is pushing your team to adapt and adopt these tools to their workflows? Because, often when you think about an employee in large organizations, right, they are not really attuned to risk. They're not going to look outside the box on how to execute in this job, because my job is to put out the 20 pieces of content. I'm going to run through my system. But now the world has changed, and Jake's coming to me as our leader and saying, hey, you need to use these tools because your 20 pieces of content is now 200. And so how do you get them to adopt the mindset of adopting and being curious to flex into these new tools and new worlds?
It's a great question. I feel like I need to answer that in two parts. For the little content market, little lean, mean, leaner now and meaner at the same time, content operation that we're running, it's a very small team. It's mostly me and a couple other people helping out, some graphics from time to time. And that kind of like small, like little entrepreneurial environment inside a larger business, I don't find it to be problematic. And I quite frankly find most people certainly to be comfortable working with somebody of my, whatever tier we're calling it, at this point.
God status.
Not only is open to it, I think they recognize that it's an incredible opportunity to make sure they're not dinosaurs. Right, in a few years, like I think from, how can you not? You may fear it a little bit. You may be apprehensive or anxious about the change, but how do you not look at? To be crude about it, I still have a job, and my job is working with me to figure out how I change and evolve. I think that's an incredible opportunity. And I think there's a different challenge for the more scaled parts of our business, like 150 engineers in the company, and for something trickier, like engineering, that's not a little nimble entrepreneurial part of our own business, but something that we need to deliver day to day for our customers that have certain expectations. There, I think you're kind of on the money with the challenge. I think, to speak openly about it, I think there is a challenge there. I don't think anybody is resistant. I don't think we've come across anybody that's like, hell no. I will say there was some of that maybe 9 months ago, like here's all the reasons this will never work. People that were probably had some inner anxiety about it if you get into their subconscious. But I think today, most people that aren't retiring in 2 years, again, have the presence of mind to realize if I don't get on this train, I don't know what I'm doing in a few years. But I do think there is somewhere in the services business at scale, there is an incentives problem for the team, which is, to put it quite crudely, hopefully my team's not going to watch this and wince. Great. I have figured out through some coaching and suggestions from my team, through my own innovation and creativity, I figured out using these tools that I was given access to or being paid for. I figured out how to do this project that we sold with, for a budget that gave me, say, making up a number here, 80 hours, was able to do it in 20 hours at the end of the day. Congratulations. And what? Congratulations. Here's 4 times the work that we expect you to keep doing. Right. So, they're not going to get paid more, right, if they're doing 4 times the productivity. So I think there is a bit of like a difficult incentives problem, a difficult measurement problem of, even let's go back to that example and take out the psychology of it. Even if they were able to do that in 20% of the time, what does that mean for the next things we sell? Was that something specific to that kind of project? Was it something specific about how that engineer knew how to work? So I think it's also hard to take those lessons concretely as leadership. You can't just, I'm not going to, imagine going to the team and being like, Janie over here was able to do this migration in 20% of the cost we estimated for. Congratulations, Janie. Because of your hard work, I'm now decreeing to the team that all of your budgets are cut by 70% to do the same amount. Right? So, there is a bit of a, what do you take? Was it because we encouraged her as one of the smartest people on our team to be an early adopter, which we can't expect from everybody on our team? Was it something about that particular block of work? So it is simultaneously difficult to take clear lessons that you can apply to set a new standard and expectation, especially while so much is changing so quickly and so much of this is still being discovered. And there is a problem of how do we get a shared incentive and a shared psychology around the benefits of cutting down that effort. And I think and I'm speaking quite openly, we're in a unique moment because we have not, the dial has not turned overnight for most customers, certainly customers that are let's call them slower, stodgier, more risk averse, like large businesses and enterprises where suddenly they're coming to us and saying this budget should be 20% of what it is. Some of them maybe, but there's still enough out there that, people haven't, similarly just said, do it with AI, cut your budget down completely, at least for the kind of customers we tend to work with. So there's a unique moment where, again, quite frankly, I think we can sell things for similar kind of price tags, sell enough that, or, maybe it's a little less, but not dramatically less,
for the same scope that was before. We have the same budget, but for the same scope, a slightly reduced budget. And that there is an opportunity to create a shared incentive of like, look, we sold it for this. If you can get this done in half the time, you know what? Well, I want you to find some time to tell us how you did it, share some lessons learned, but otherwise take that time back, right, as a reward. Now, to be honest, that's not going to be sustainable in the long term because eventually customers are going to catch on. Prices for the same features are going to go down. Upstart, nimble, the next 5-8 person company competitors are going to figure out how they can do the same work and just, in the free market undercut us dramatically on price. But there is this, I think, transition window to create a shared incentive to explore and share in the reward of doing something more efficiently.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool idea, is like sharing in the incentive. And I don't think we've had conversations enough about this transition period that we're really in. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, because Dante, I was thinking, just off the top of my head, I know someone, right? They have a job. It's very, labor intensive. Let's call them, they work in finance. Maybe they're an accountant, right? And this person, they can get their job done incredibly quickly, right? And they're innovative and they're younger. So they found out how they can run some programs through some systems, right? They get their job done in, let's say, 25 minutes for a 4-hour work week or a 4-hour work day. And so what they did is they implemented a mouse jiggler. And that mouse jiggler just floats around on the screen now. So they have the monitoring system from IT that can tell that they're still actively engaging on their tool. And unless you create the incentive system, right, and teach the employees that they can do so much more, you might find a lot of people who are like, hey, man, I can get all my work done in 25 minutes, and then I'm just going to go hang out and do what I want to do. But that doesn't create like a good company culture, right? And so there's that weird transition inflection point where you have to kind of balance what those two things mean,
Right, and it's not just about company culture. While it is true that people's mouses jiggling all day is not good for company culture, the more existential issue is that, and it goes back to this conversation about who joins your company when you're 100, 200 people. The more existential challenge is eventually in genuinely competitive markets, digital services may be one of the few remaining truly competitive markets that are out there, that next hungry 5-person team, 6-person team, 3 founders do have a clear shared incentive to not just, jiggle their mouse for the other 20 hours, but to do more work and be more productive and do well. And, that catches up with you sooner or later, right? If you're still, you can only, ship your goods at the speed of a horse and carriage for so long before, if you can't go through that, if you can't overcome that innovator's dilemma, you're going to get your lunch eaten by the next group behind you. And, again, not to sound overly cynical, if we can't find those shared incentives, why does a person in a 200-person company care? Let's be direct about it. Some people are short-sighted.
Yeah.
Some people are just trying to get, I don't just mean that to be demeaning. Sometimes it's just literally, I'm trying to, especially these days, just trying to survive to next year.
Yeah. A lot of people are using their job as a vehicle just to live life, right? I mean, they don't have the passion behind what they're doing, trying to create, trying to be competitive, like you talked about, Jake. And I think we have to address kind of what those different mindsets look like when we approach work.
Right. So a survivalist mindset, even if, where they're not thinking about how am I relevant in 5 years, just how do I get through the next year? And for some people, they just feel like that's, crudely not my problem. I'll go work for the car company instead of the horse company when I eventually get laid off when the company starts to go south. So I think there is it's a dark topic, but I think there is a challenge here of creating shared incentives. I think it speaks to a larger, and this gets very out of digital realm and more philosophical, but I think there are some, very large philosophical questions about what does a total transformation of the work that it requires to do the kind of things we've counted on look like for society? Is it, in a what I would think of as maybe a more ideal world, a world where, 10 years from now, we can do things in a fraction of the time that we used to have to need to do these things. Some of that unlocks, we can do more. Some of that unlocks, like, is that the trade? If the Industrial Revolution and the printing press was the gates that unlocked going from I'm hunting and gathering 7 days a week to I have a weekend and I have a 5-day work week, is AI feels like it should be the gateway to this is how to get down to a 3-day. Mm-hmm.
work week or a 3.5 day work week. But there's another path that you could see things where you could see things going, which is no, it doesn't benefit sort of the masses. It's sort of like the accumulated wealth and opportunity just goes to the people that, you know, govern the technology, sort of like the ownership class in business. And I think that the incentive problem we have now actually speaks to a larger, so this isn't a political podcast, but speaks to a larger sort of social turmoil that I think these tools are eventually going to create.
I mean, dude, if you imagine what happens, Dante, if like the 1% turns legitimately into like a 7%, right, of the population, and the divide is that much larger between those two groups because those who have adopted the technology early, right, compared to the horse and the carriage, right, is really interesting to think about.
Are you an optimist, Jake, about the future with implementing or what AI looks like, you know, 10, 15 years down the road? And what it does to society in general, in particular?
That's a great question. Is there a third choice to glass half full? I think it depends on what we mean by optimistic. There are some things I am optimistic about with it. I think we can, truly create more personalized experiences for people. I think the quality of the things that we make can go up exponentially, which feels like in some ways it's been sagging. Like it's a silly example and a very micro example that you have to extrapolate, but even just things like in our world of like, regression testing and test coverage and like ripe opportunities for automation and AI to come in can, I think, level up, quality of products. Like I made the mistake of, I shouldn't call it a mistake. I'm enjoying it, but I sort of made the mistake of buying like a first generation platform electric car, like that first year model, first generation, right, of the vehicle. And it's overall, I'm enjoying it, but it's definitely got like first year kinks. And I think like a place where AI, I think, can be transformative is just like the precision of like test this thing in a scalable way, 17 different ways. It could go send the AI operator to break the software, right, to break the OS, right? For example, I'm an optimist that I think we have huge social problems, technology problems that I would like to believe, not even AGI, but just like, again, more transformative technology that can give us 10x, 20x, 30x on research and solving problems and analyzing data might be able to help us fix. So, for example, like I have this radical notion that climate change is a real thing and a problem for us. It's the kind of problem, maybe this is where I sound like a pessimist, that can seem, again, existential, where AI can give someone like me hope is when you think about total society transformation and how we solve problems in the next 20, 30 years. Maybe there's not a group of humans out there that can unlock and solve those problems with what we have had a year ago or have today. But maybe how do we try experimenting, producing some new technologies? How do we really solve some data problems at scale? Advanced AI might be the kind of thing that can actually help us solve big technology, big social problems. So there are definitely aspects of AI that I'm optimistic about. I do think in some ways that the countervailing force to a bigger wealth gap can be that more people can do things without needing huge companies, things that you couldn't, if the printing press made it possible for somebody other than the church and the clergy to be able to publish and reach a mass audience, does AI make it possible to make devices and gear and peripherals with 3D printers and start a business in a way that just like there were too many hurdles or too many costs, upfront costs for most people to get over. So I guess I might say I'm optimistic overall, but I would say that I am also wide-eyed, pragmatic, maybe you would say pessimistic about how difficult the change between here and there is going to be. If you might have asked me 2 years ago, I might have made the argument that AI is, the next evolution of if you look at computing history, you go from, I have to write hexadecimal codes to write a program to I can write in English in shorthands to I can write, autocomplete and have suggestions for my code and to I can search any, code snippet I need on the internet, and find it in a few minutes. Like it's consistently gotten easier and easier to write software. That has not meant that has never resulted in a contraction in the industry. It's actually resulted in an explosion of the industry. I think that's an optimistic view I would have shared not even 2 years ago. I will tell you right now, maybe this sounds pessimistic, I know I don't actually think that's the case anymore for AI. I actually think the way where AI is going with technology is it will be in some sense a destructive force in it just does not take the same manpower, the same human power to write software. I think it is an automation where you will not see nearly as many software engineers as we think of today, or high paid, high wall barriers to entry, like software developers and coders. So I think it will be a creatively destructive force in software engineering as a space and skill set. Doesn't mean it's for the worse in the long run. Doesn't mean it's not ultimately for the betterment of society, but it's going to be, I think, very difficult, particularly for people in that craft. People people that were told go stop being a journalist and start writing code probably feel pretty bad right now, right, as an industry. And I do think for agencies like ours, it is going to be a very difficult period of transformation and figuring out how we create value, what things take, how we change our teams, how we change what we do.
I want to ask your opinion about one of the key topics that we hear a lot about, and it's very popular on platforms like LinkedIn and other places, is like founder-led marketing, right? A lot of leaders in the C-suite, founders, leaders of organizations are asking to be, or are now being asked to be the tip of the spear, sharing the story, talking about things, showing their personality, creating human connection. What do you kind of think about this new wave of founder-led, leader-based marketing, and how are you kind of participating in that?
I kind of want you to tell me a little. What are some good examples that?
Great examples is there's some companies out there. One of which is me and Dante talk about this guy all the time. He created a company called RB2B. It's like a attribution software that pulls and scrapes data from your website, gives you LinkedIn notifications, stuff like that. This guy is out in front, right, talking about the brand, lessons learned, failures, how he's built the business, how he's building the team. Basically, kind of like a look behind the curtain, if you will. A lot of leaders today, even, from a podcasting perspective, are being asked to go out on the podcast, tell your story so people see not just the brand, but also you, Jake, in front, who's a leader of our organization, how we create connection with you, which then leads to brand affinity. How are you kind of thinking about this wave of so many people putting so much time creating content in their businesses?
I mean, I'll be the first. There's a lot of ways to come at that. I'll be the first advocate for, that's what I'm doing at the moment, original founder, of creating a lot of content, telling your story. It's quite frankly easier than ever to do with the tools that we have and the reach that we can have with modern social media and so many platforms now, including ones we help make for clients, to tell that story and amplify your story. So yes, content market, tell a story. Open up, reach people, grab some attention, differentiate yourself in some ways. I think there's another trend that you're hitting on, which is not unique or endemic to business, which is this question. Frankly, we talked about this today earlier, working on some of our own content marketing for our clients, which is this question of authenticity in voice, and a question of people being drawn toward honesty, being drawn, watching my language here, in a world full of manure at times, looking for truth, looking for honesty, looking for connection. And there's a social aspect to that, which is wanting to believe. It's not a new idea. It's in no way a new idea. But maybe a wider democratization of the idea of wanting to feel like if you're voting with your wallet, that you're voting for something good. Again, I actually don't think these are radically new ideas found, I don't want to say cult-like, but I think founder personality has been a thing for a long time in digital and in business. There are case studies being written about in the 2000s about companies like Nike and Apple and caring about what they do. The new generation at that time, millennials, caring about the social good and the social impact of these businesses and wanting to believe in the company beyond just the quality of their product. I'm trying to think if I'm answering the question here, but it doesn't surprise me. I think businesses should keep doing it. I will also say, I personally also think there is something refreshing about, I guess, two thoughts here. One, it may be a bit contrarian. One, there's something refreshing about show, don't tell. I can't say that, my way is, of course, not the only
way to do it, but I know I've always tried to imbue a philosophy for our own historic marketing, which is I don't want somebody getting on a camera and talking about what we're going to do. I think it's actually much more powerful when you make something or ship something or deliver something and you are able to have the, I would call it the maturity, the patience, the discipline to wait until you do that, to tell your story. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to come from the founder. I also, again, maybe being a little bit contrarian here, and maybe very fresh for me, having, coming off of a merger and sale of a lot of my shares in the business a couple of years ago. I think if you want more than a boutique company, I think if you want more than a lifestyle business, I think it's quite hazardous to tie the brand to a single person or a single identity. My point of view from starting the company is like, don't get me wrong, I'll be out there, I'll tell the story of the company, I'll be our marketer and storytelling in chief. But I will argue that I have failed as a business leader if the brand is not much bigger than me and much more important than me. The sign, in my view, of a successful scale business is the founder could get hit by a bus the next day and the company would keep going without a hitch. So I don't know. Am I answering your question? Or
you are. You're giving us a great perspective on what that kind of stuff looks like. I mean, there's just so much pressure out there where it seems like we're being told to do certain things because they are popular without truly understanding the bigger ramifications of where we're trying to get to. You know what I mean? It's like everybody can stop at the gas station on the side of the road and grab a soda because everybody else is doing it. But is that the best thing that's going to get you there in the healthiest way at the end of the day? Maybe that's a bad analogy. Maybe I'm not even answering my own question. But so here you go, Jake. The last thing that we do here on the podcast is we have a tradition where our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. Okay. So when we're talking about authenticity, right? Naturally, when you show up on camera, you're able to communicate incredibly well and talk about your journey, the experiences that you've made, right? We have a perception of you. But what is one thing that we might not know about Jake that more people should know about?
Good question. I feel like maybe motivated by your prompt, maybe some people do know this. Despite my surprising energy at 4 p.m. recording a podcast, my natural disposition is actually pretty introverted as a person. I don't want to overstate that. I'm not, the guy that, is miserable if he's not just curled up in his room at the end of the day every day. I like some networking. I like meeting with people. But I definitely find a lot of energy from, private spaces or having quiet time. I don't naturally want to walk into a room and just schmooze with everybody there. It's probably why I started a remote company. In hindsight, maybe it speaks to my answer about not wanting to be, wanting to be involved in the storytelling of the company, but not necessarily wanting to be along, the permanent identified face of the company. So I guess what springs to mind is despite, how people might know me from like writing quite a bit or engaging on social or conferences, I'm actually quite normally tilted toward that introverted end of the spectrum.
Well, brother, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. Seriously, definition of all innovation, and everything we talked about today was truly inspiring. That's the podcast. We'll catch you in the next one.